On a landmark day in the United States legal system, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as a verdict was finally reached in the criminal case against Sean Diddy Combs, one of the most influential figures in modern hip-hop and entertainment. After weeks of testimony, evidentiary battles, and tense deliberations, the trial concluded with a split verdict that sent shockwaves through legal, media, and in public spheres. The man known for shaping musical culture now stood at the center of a federal prosecution involving allegations as severe as sex trafficking, racketeering, and transportation for prostitution. The significance of this moment extended far beyond one celebrity's fate. It raised urgent questions about justice, celebrity immunity, power dynamics, and the treatment of victims in high-profile criminal cases. Sean Combs, who built a multi-million-dollar empire encompassing music, fashion, alcohol branding, and media ventures, had long commanded respect and admiration from fans and peers alike. Yet, behind the glitz and the carefully curated public persona, federal investigators alleged a darker undercurrent, one in which Combs allegedly orchestrated a network of coercion, abuse, and exploitation. These accusations were not mere tabloid fodder. They were grounded in detailed testimonies, visual evidence, and corroborated timelines, with charges including sex trafficking of known public figures like Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe, as well as violations under the Mann Act. The trial brought to the forefront decades-old concerns about abuse of power in the entertainment industry. The verdict on this pivotal day delivered a complex narrative. Not guilty on the most severe counts of racketeering and sex trafficking, yet guilty of 2 Mann Act violations, transportation to engage in prostitution. The outcome divided observers. For Combs' supporters, it was a partial vindication. For others, especially the survivors and their advocates, it was a solemn reminder of how elusive full accountability can be, even in the face of considerable evidence. The courtroom itself became a theater of emotional and symbolic weight, a space where past traumas were relived, reputations were dissected, and the line between influence and impunity was tested. This case also drew unprecedented public interest, fueled by the celebrity status of the accused and the broader societal conversation about Me Too, sexual violence, and the silencing of victims. Outside the courthouse, supporters and critics of Combs clashed vocally, their debates mirroring the national divide on issues of justice and celebrity culture. Meanwhile, inside, the legal process continued with a bail denial and a looming sentencing phase, leaving many to speculate whether Combs would serve significant prison time or find a path to re-enter public life once more. This report will delve deep into the trajectory of this case, from Combs' rise in early environment through the mechanisms of control and coercion described during trial, to the personal and professional fallout endured by victims, and finally to the implications of Combs' decision to maintain innocence throughout. At the heart of it lies a fundamental question. In a system where power often protects the powerful, what does justice really look like? The origins of the criminal proceedings against Sean Diddy Combs are deeply intertwined with the environment in which he rose to fame, a world of immense celebrity, luxury, and unchecked influence. To understand how this legal saga unfolded, one must first examine the context in which Combs operated for decades. An entertainment empire where power often blurred the lines between professional boundaries and personal control, and where silence was frequently the price of access, opportunity, and survival. Sean Combs' ascent began in the late 1990s when he transitioned from behind-the-scenes record executive to cultural icon. He founded Bad Boy Records, signed global superstars, and cultivated a public persona as a mogul, trendsetter, and aspirational figure. With music, fashion, notably his Sean John brand, vodka lines, and TV networks under his name, Combs created a sprawling empire. However, this same empire allegedly provided a facade behind which more troubling dynamics played out. According to prosecutors and witness testimonies, the inner world of Combs' operations was marked by an unspoken hierarchy where loyalty was prized and dissent was punished. Many of the key relationships described during the trial, especially those involving accusers like Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe, originated in professional settings, such as artist mentorships or employment arrangements. Yet, these relationships allegedly evolved into coercive, abusive dynamics underpinned by Combs's dominance and the psychological pressures of his industry stature. Cassie Ventura's early involvement with Combs began when she was a young artist signed under his label. What seemed on the surface like an opportunity for artistic collaboration quickly became, in her later claims, a years-long entanglement of control, abuse, and exploitation. Witnesses described an environment at Combs's homes and studios that blurred the line between business and personal life, where late-night gatherings, drug use, and sexually charged expectations were not only common, but often normalized. Staff, security, and assistants, according to court findings, were regularly involved in coordinating travel or logistical needs that allegedly facilitated the misconduct. From a psychological standpoint, individuals in Combs's orbit, particularly young women, entered an environment where questioning his behavior could lead to professional blacklisting or personal isolation. Prosecutors argued that the imbalance of power was stark. An aspiring artist or employee, financially and emotionally dependent on Combs, faced an unspoken threat of ruin if they resisted his advances or disclosed what they experienced. This culture of silence and complicity was further reinforced by legal tools like NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, settlements, and aggressive public relations management. Former employees testified to witnessing incidents of verbal abuse, physical aggression, and the use of Combs's wealth to suppress potential scandal. Even as some victims attempted to speak out informally over the years, the absence of institutional support and the fear of retaliation often kept them from pursuing legal channels. Media coverage in the early 2000s occasionally hinted at erratic behavior, rumors of misconduct, and volatile relationships involving Combs. But none of these red flags coalesced into legal accountability until a broader cultural shift began to emerge. The Me Too movement, which empowered survivors of sexual abuse to speak openly, catalyzed a wave of re-examinations into long-standing allegations against powerful men in entertainment. In this climate, women like Cassie Ventura found a new courage and public support to share their experiences. What followed was a series of investigations, both journalistic and legal. Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, working with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, initiated inquiries into Combs's conduct. These investigations spanned multiple jurisdictions, incorporated digital evidence, and relied heavily on testimonies from victims and former insiders. Over time, the informal whispers about Combs's alleged conduct solidified into a formal indictment, setting the stage for one of the most high-profile trials in recent memory. For Combs himself, the months leading to the trial were marked by escalating legal peril and intense media scrutiny. Arrested in September 2024, he was denied bail and remained in custody as prosecutors painted a picture of him as a flight risk and a danger to the community. The prosecution's narrative positioned Combs not just as a participant in criminal acts, but as a central figure in an orchestrated system of exploitation enabled by his wealth, charisma, and network. At the same time, Combs's defense maintained his innocence, framing him as a victim of public overreach and opportunistic accusations. His legal team sought to discredit the prosecution's case, highlighting inconsistencies in testimonies and suggesting that any relationships or encounters were consensual. In their eyes, the charges were exaggerated, a misrepresentation of a celebrity lifestyle viewed through a legalistic lens. The emotional climate in the courtroom reflected the gravity of the proceedings. Family members of both Combs and the accusers filled the gallery, visibly affected as sensitive testimonies were read aloud. At times, even Combs, usually composed and strategic in public, appeared subdued, weighed down by the gravity of the allegations and their potential consequences. In this highly charged setting, observers from legal circles, media, and activist communities watched closely. The trial represented more than one man's guilt or innocence. It symbolized a confrontation with the toxic underbelly of celebrity power, the fragility of accountability, and the resilience of those who dared to speak out. At the heart of the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial was not just the question of whether individual acts occurred, but the existence of an overarching system, a carefully constructed environment of psychological, emotional, and logistical control designed to facilitate exploitation. Prosecutors alleged that Combs wielded his influence with strategic intent, engineering circumstances in which victims were rendered voiceless, powerless, and often complicit in their own silencing. Understanding this system of manipulation is crucial to comprehending how such conduct could persist for years beneath the surface of celebrity glamour. Central to the prosecution's argument was that Combs used his celebrity status and financial power not merely for personal indulgence, but to build an ecosystem where abuse could operate without consequence. Witnesses and court documents revealed a pattern. Individuals who entered Combs's orbit, whether as aspiring artists, employees, or romantic partners, were gradually drawn into a world in which the boundaries between professional obligation and personal submission blurred. One of the most insidious tools in this system was coercive dependence. Many of the victims, such as Cassie Ventura, were initially presented with career opportunities. Combs offered mentorship, exposure, and access, precisely what aspiring talents in the competitive entertainment industry desperately sought. But these opportunities came with invisible strings. Housing, financial support, and professional advancement were gradually made conditional upon personal loyalty and emotional obedience. The imbalance of power meant that resistance could result in immediate isolation, both professionally and socially. This dynamic was reinforced through legal mechanisms. Several testimonies referenced the use of NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, that effectively gagged individuals from speaking about what they witnessed or experienced. Employees were frequently bound by contracts that limited their ability to act independently or challenge Combs's authority. These documents, backed by an army of high-powered attorneys, made it clear that stepping out of line would result in legal retaliation. This created an atmosphere of institutionalized silence, one where truth was subordinated to control. Another key element in the manipulation system was emotional domination through violence and intimidation. The judge, in denying Combs's bail, cited numerous examples of physical abuse acknowledged by the defense itself. Incidents like the London hotel assault and the CNN-released 2016 footage illustrated a pattern of unchecked aggression. The fact that the defense conceded to acts of domestic violence, particularly against Cassie Ventura, further validated the prosecution's framing of Combs as not just manipulative, but dangerous. The emotional toll of this violence was exacerbated by gaslighting tactics, methods used to destabilize victims' perception of reality. Jane Doe, for instance, described scenarios in which she was lured under false pretenses and later blamed for the resulting trauma. Survivors testified about being isolated from friends and family, told they were overreacting, or made to believe that what they experienced was consensual, even pleasurable. Such tactics rendered victims uncertain, ashamed, and often incapable of seeking help. The logistics of the abuse were disturbingly systematic. Staff were allegedly instructed to manage transportation, accommodations, and cover-ups, particularly in cases involving transportation to engage in prostitution. These acts fell under violations of the Mann Act, a statute originally designed to prevent human trafficking across state lines. Combs was convicted on 2 such counts, with prosecutors arguing that staff played a direct role in facilitating these crimes, effectively making the abuse a coordinated, institutionalized operation. Furthermore, the prosecution pointed to substance abuse as both a tool and symptom of control. Drugs were routinely present in the environments described by victims. Not only did this facilitate compliance and reduce resistance, but it also created a mechanism through which victims could later be discredited. If a survivor attempted to report the abuse, their credibility could be undermined by their drug use, an outcome allegedly engineered by Combs and his enablers. What amplified the effectiveness of these control systems was Combs's mastery of public relations. Known for his charm and charisma, he maintained a carefully curated image of generosity, success, and moral ambiguity. Even as allegations swirled, he managed to maintain corporate endorsements, media influence, and fan loyalty. This duality, one persona for the public, another for the private realm, was not accidental. It served as both shield and weapon, shielding him from scrutiny and weaponizing public doubt against those who accused him. The fear of retaliation was not theoretical. Multiple witnesses referenced direct and indirect threats, including threats of financial ruin, public humiliation, or legal annihilation. Some individuals, including Deontay Nash, who later testified, claimed they lived in fear even after escaping Combs's inner circle. Nash's post-verdict letter to the judge outlined the lingering fear that Combs instilled in those who came forward, underscoring the chilling effect of his power. This system extended beyond individual victims. It was embedded into a culture. The entertainment industry's historical tolerance for eccentric behavior among male celebrities, particularly black male moguls, allowed Combs's alleged misconduct to go unchecked for years. Peers, collaborators, and media entities often turned a blind eye, citing the need to protect the culture or maintain business alliances. This normalization of abuse under the guise of artistic freedom or personal eccentricity was itself a mechanism of systemic control. Even after his arrest, Combs's legal team attempted to minimize the implications of the charges, drawing comparisons to unrelated Mann Act cases and citing examples of other high-profile figures who faced no prosecution. These arguments sought to reframe the narrative as one of selective enforcement or prosecutorial overreach, a strategy that, while legally viable, further illustrated the enduring reach of Combs's influence. In the courtroom, however, these defenses faced increasing scrutiny. The judge's rationale for denying bail, citing mandatory detention, the danger to the community, and past violent behavior, was a rare moment of systemic resistance to a figure who had long operated above consequence. It was an acknowledgement that influence should not negate accountability and that charisma cannot erase harm. Ultimately, the system of manipulation and control described during the trial was multifaceted: psychological, legal, logistical, and cultural. It thrived on secrecy, dependency, and fear, and it was enabled by a society that often confuses celebrity with moral integrity. The challenge now is not only to hold Combs accountable, but to dismantle the very conditions that allowed such control to persist for so long. The trial and subsequent conviction of Sean Diddy Combs on 2 counts under the Mann Act marked not only a legal turning point, but also a dramatic unraveling of his public and private identities. While Combs managed to avoid conviction on the more severe charges of sex trafficking and racketeering, the fallout from the case was far-reaching. It affected not just his reputation and career, but more crucially, the lives of those who accused him, survivors whose stories bore the psychological and emotional scars of years of abuse and coercion. The consequences of this case extended well beyond a courtroom. They permeated homes, headlines, and entire communities. For the accusers, particularly Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe, the toll of coming forward was immense. These women were not anonymous plaintiffs in a distant case. Cassie, a public figure herself, had built a career under the shadow of Combs's influence. Speaking out meant revisiting traumatic experiences, facing aggressive cross-examination, and reliving moments of abuse in a public forum. The emotional weight of this exposure was compounded by public scrutiny, online harassment, and fears of retribution. Despite these challenges, their testimonies, bolstered by years of suppressed truths and corroborated evidence, became central to the government's narrative. Mental health repercussions were significant. Survivors described prolonged periods of depression, PTSD, and anxiety. Some pursued therapy, others suffered in silence. Jane Doe's legal representatives emphasized her emotional instability in the wake of her involvement with Combs, pointing to substance abuse and suicidal ideation as direct results of her experience. These effects underscore the often invisible legacy of trauma that such abuses leave behind, trauma that continues long after the headlines fade. The impact extended into personal lives as well. Families of the victims reported tension, estrangement, and fear of retaliation, of public exposure, and of being disbelieved. In many ways, the act of testifying was not just about holding Combs accountable, but about reclaiming agency over their narratives. Letters submitted to the court, including those from Ventura and witness Deontay Nash, conveyed a palpable sense of lingering threat. They portrayed Combs not just as an abuser, but as a symbol of impunity, a man who, despite overwhelming evidence, still seemed beyond the reach of consequence. Professionally, the case delivered a severe blow to Combs's once untouchable empire. His media ventures, including Revolt TV, distanced themselves from his brand. Business partnerships, particularly in fashion and liquor, were suspended or dissolved. The cultural icon once celebrated for uplifting black excellence was now synonymous with scandal and exploitation. For Combs, the trial did not just threaten imprisonment. It dismantled decades of brand building and eroded trust with fans, sponsors, and collaborators. The hip-hop community, known for its often divided reactions to allegations against prominent figures, responded with both support and silence. Some artists publicly defended Combs, framing him as a victim of a larger plot to dismantle powerful black men. Others, especially women in the industry, called for accountability and solidarity with survivors. This division mirrored broader societal rifts between those who saw the trial as a necessary reckoning and those who perceived it as a witch hunt. Public reaction was equally polarized. Outside the courthouse, supporters and critics clashed, with some chanting "Free Diddy" and others expressing outrage at the not guilty verdicts on sex trafficking charges. The confusion and tension were visible, with police installing barricades and controlling crowds that oscillated between celebration and protest. For many, the verdict, especially the acquittals, felt like a denial of justice. For others, it confirmed their belief in Combs' innocence and the overreach of the justice system. Media coverage reflected this complexity. While mainstream outlets acknowledged the split verdict and the remaining prison risks for Combs, the tone of reporting varied. Some emphasized the severity of the Mann Act convictions and the symbolic significance of the case. Others portrayed the trial as a cautionary tale about prosecuting high-profile individuals with incomplete evidence. This dichotomy shaped how the public interpreted the trial. Was it a partial victory for survivors or a missed opportunity for full justice? Despite the split verdict, the symbolic consequences for Combs were profound. The carefully cultivated image of a philanthropic mogul and cultural leader was permanently stained. The court's refusal to grant bail further underscored a growing recognition of Combs as a potential danger, not merely a celebrity under fire. His demeanor during the reading of the verdict, mouthing "thank you" to jurors despite partial convictions, suggested a man relieved to have avoided the most severe outcomes, yet fully aware that his status had irrevocably changed. The case also impacted future prosecutorial strategies. Federal authorities, including the Department of Justice and Homeland Security investigations, emphasized the importance of victim-centered approaches and reaffirmed their commitment to pursuing complex sex crime cases, even against the wealthy and powerful. Their post-verdict statements highlighted the bravery of survivors and acknowledged the lasting harm caused by sex trafficking and coercion. Although they fell short of full conviction, their pursuit of the case marked a shift toward accountability in spaces long protected by influence and intimidation. For survivors, the journey is far from over. Legal victory does not equate to personal closure, but in coming forward, they have reshaped the conversation around power, abuse, and silence in the entertainment industry. They have forced institutions to reevaluate their complicity and inspired others to speak their truths. Regardless of the final sentencing, this case has become a watershed moment, a reminder that even the most untouchable figures can be brought under scrutiny when survivors are brave enough to speak. In the emotionally charged courtroom where Sean Diddy Combs' fate was being decided, a broader transformation was also underway, one rooted in the courage of victims who dared to speak against a powerful cultural figure. The decision by individuals like Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe to come forward was not only personally risky, but also socially significant. It disrupted the long-standing norm of silence that has protected celebrities accused of abuse and reignited a national dialogue about the intersections of power, violence, and accountability. What motivates someone to speak out against a figure like Combs? For many survivors of abuse, the decision is rarely immediate. It is the result of years of trauma, shame, internalized fear, and gradual empowerment. In Cassie's case, her choice to testify publicly and submit formal statements reflected a need for justice, not only for herself, but also for those who might have faced similar abuse in silence. In her letter to the court, she articulated the urgency of keeping Combs in custody, not out of vengeance, but out of concern for community safety and victim protection. For Jane Doe, speaking out appeared deeply personal and symbolic. Her testimony, though legally complex and ultimately not resulting in a trafficking conviction, offered a rare window into the psychological dynamics of control and survival. Her voice, despite not leading to full legal vindication, amplified the narrative that abuse often exists in the gray zones, where manipulation, dependency, and fear silence even the strongest of individuals. This act of storytelling in the face of public scrutiny must be seen as a radical act of resistance. Survivors knew their reputations would be challenged, their histories dissected, and their motives questioned. Yet they moved forward, empowered in part by cultural movements like Me Too and Black women's advocacy circles, which have collectively pushed against the normalization of abuse in high-power industries. Their stories revealed a deeper truth. When the system fails to protect the vulnerable, survivors often become their own advocates. The aftermath of their testimonies sparked a wave of reactions. Supporters flooded social media with messages of solidarity, while detractors accused them of chasing fame or money. This polarization is emblematic of the cultural tension between celebrity worship and the pursuit of justice. Nevertheless, the women's bravery galvanized broader support from legal experts, activists, and even other survivors, many of whom expressed renewed strength to pursue justice in their own cases. Institutionally, the case has already begun reshaping prosecutorial thinking. The Southern District of New York's U.S. Attorney, in his post-verdict statement, emphasized the need for victim-centered approaches and thanked the survivors for their courage. This acknowledgement, however symbolic, is vital in a legal system where victims of sexual violence are too often sidelined or re-traumatized during proceedings. The Department of Justice's emphasis on survivor collaboration marks a shift from the impersonal bureaucracy of criminal litigation toward a more humane, inclusive model. But the impact doesn't stop at the courtroom. Cultural spaces are also reckoning with this case's implications. Artists, executives, and influencers are being forced to reevaluate their alliances, their silences, and their definitions of accountability. A previously untouchable figure has been legally convicted, and while not on the most severe charges, it marks a line in the sand. No longer can wealth or reputation alone shield one from the consequences of sustained abuse. This moment also challenges media industries to do better. For decades, powerful figures like Combs were insulated by publicists, curated press coverage, and media outlets complicit in silencing rumors to protect brands and profits. The events of this trial, including the public readback of damning transcripts and the denial of bail based on past violence, shattered that protective veil. Journalists now face renewed responsibility to interrogate, not idolize, to elevate survivor voices, not merely dramatize high-profile cases. Perhaps most significantly, this case has shifted the conversation within communities of color, especially among Black women who have long felt ignored in national discourses on abuse and trauma. Cassie Ventura's visibility, as a woman of color accusing a powerful Black male figure, placed a unique spotlight on the cultural taboo of speaking against men who built the culture. This dynamic, often rooted in generational trauma and racial solidarity, has historically silenced Black women for fear of betraying the community or feeding white-dominated narratives of criminality. Yet in this case, the narrative evolved. Black survivors reclaimed their voices, not in opposition to their culture, but in defense of it. They argued that protecting the community must also mean protecting its most vulnerable members. Organizations supporting Black women rallied behind Ventura and Jane Doe, pushing for systemic change not only in entertainment but in the justice system itself. Of course, resistance continues. The not guilty verdicts on sex trafficking sparked disappointment among some observers and survivor advocates. Many felt that the evidence, emotional testimony, corroborative documents, behavioral patterns should have yielded harsher penalties. These frustrations speak to a larger issue: the legal system's high evidentiary threshold for convictions in sex crimes, particularly those involving psychological coercion rather than physical force. Nonetheless, even without full convictions, the case set precedent. It demonstrated that survivors can speak, that the government will prosecute, and that public opinion can shift when stories are told with clarity and courage. The long-term effects may include more comprehensive laws, increased survivor protections, and new support structures for those seeking justice. Looking forward, advocates hope this case will embolden others to come forward, especially within high-profile, male-dominated industries where silence has long been equated with survival. Whether through civil litigation, criminal prosecution, or storytelling in media, the ripple effects are already being felt. The possibility of justice, imperfect though it may be, is no longer out of reach. In the end, the decision to speak out was not just about holding one man accountable. It was about challenging a system, reclaiming dignity, and redefining what justice means in an age where influence is no longer a shield. While Combs awaits sentencing, the survivors have already redefined history, not through vengeance, but through truth. The trial of Sean Diddy, Combs has left an indelible mark on both the justice system and the cultural consciousness of a nation. It was never just about the legal fate of a music mogul. It was about whether power, wealth, and fame could still serve as armor in an age increasingly defined by demands for accountability. Through a complex, emotionally charged, and at times contradictory process, the courtroom became the stage for a reckoning decades in the making. While the verdict may have delivered mixed legal outcomes, acquittals on sex trafficking and racketeering, convictions under the Mann Act, the deeper significance of the trial lay in the visibility it granted to survivors and the legitimacy it afforded their voices. Cassie Ventura, Jane Doe, and others who stepped into the public light were not merely witnesses. They were truth-tellers in a system that often erases or distorts their narratives. In choosing to speak, they disrupted a legacy of silence, proving that justice is not only measured by sentences, but by the courage to confront abuse with truth. For Sean Combs, the consequences have already begun to materialize. Regardless of his final sentencing, the cultural halo that once protected him has dimmed. His brand, once synonymous with ambition and innovation, now evokes controversy and betrayal. For fans, collaborators, and the broader public, the trial served as a sobering reminder of the dangers of unchecked influence and of the cost of ignoring warning signs in favor of celebrity idolatry. But from this moment of exposure comes an opportunity for the legal system to deepen its commitment to victim-centered justice, an opportunity for the entertainment industry to root out toxic structures and cultivate safer spaces, an opportunity for communities, especially those historically marginalized, to assert that accountability must never be sacrificed on the altar of cultural prestige. Perhaps most importantly, the trial offered a message to survivors watching from the margins, that their stories matter, that their voices can shift public discourse, and that they are not alone. While the legal journey may end for Combs in a sentencing hearing months away, the cultural and emotional journey for those impacted is ongoing. Healing is not linear, nor is it guaranteed, but it becomes possible when truth is spoken and when society chooses to listen with intent. In the years to come, this case will likely be remembered as a defining episode in the broader battle against abuse and impunity, not because it achieved perfect justice, but because it cracked open a space for truth in a world often built on silence. And in that crack, light entered. The hope now is that this light will continue to grow, illuminating not just the failures of the past, but the path toward a future defined by dignity, equity, and unwavering justice for all.